Okay, so following the mining craze in the last few years, there are quite a lot of X mining cards around, which is why many of you are probably asking the question, well, if they are mined on, they were running at their full power most of the time, so can I still buy them? Because prices are very cheap compared to cards that haven't been mined on. Obviously, there are also people who sell them without telling you that they have been mined on, so in theory any card could be a mining card, so you never really know in the used market right now. So maybe you're better off anyway buying a mining card. In today's video, I'm going to show you what to look out for and how to reduce the risk of buying a GPU that's gonna die sooner than a GPU that was just used with a normal gaming setup. At first though, I want to tell you what to have a look at or what to look out for when looking for mining GPUs, which would be buying a relatively new and low power consumption card like a 60 or 70 series, because they do not produce a lot of heat and do not consume a lot of power. Therefore, the chips in those cards tend to die slower, I guess, or not as frequent as the higher end ones, because those tend to run hotter and tend to run at a higher power level. The second thing you would have to look out for is a good cooler, because cards with good coolers obviously run cooler, and if the card ran cooler while mining, the lifetime of the card is proportionately higher. So in theory, a card that has ran at 60 degrees for a year straight is less likely to die than one that has been run at 80, which is actually a really big difference, bigger than you might expect, because the lifetime of an electronic component is halved every 10 degrees it runs hotter in theory. Obviously, that's not always the case, but such is the theory and a kind of a rule of thumb. This is also why many electronic components are spec'd at different temperature levels. For example, a capacitor is spec'd at 105 degrees for 30,000 hours maybe, and at 95 for 50 maybe. That's sometimes the case. I mean, most of the good quality capacitors are spec'd at 105 degrees anyway, so you wouldn't have that problem, but that's just an indicator. Another thing to look out for would be the warranty period. You might say that some vendors might not honor the warranty when the card has been mined on, but the issue is that they can't prove if the card has been mined on. So if you buy a card that has 3, 4, or even 5 years of warranty in general, like on Zotac cards, for example, and they break within that period, you should be able to return them and get either some kind of refund or a new card, which is a really good point to buy if you have the confidence to use that card for another 2-3 years, and if it breaks then, well, you could get a replacement. On the other side though, some vendors made mining specific cards which had a much smaller warranty window, like only 6 to 12 months maybe, because they knew those cards were mined on, but you can identify those relatively easily because they didn't have as many display ports, sometimes only having one DVI port. I have tested on RX 570 with that, for example, and yeah, you can identify the cards by those. That's basically everything you can look out for. Obviously, you can also look at the card's general shape. So if it has a lot of dust on it, the owner might not have taken good care of the mining cards, so you might not want to buy off of him. But also there is the problem that they just can clean the card out before selling it, so that's also not really a valid point to look out for. It's kind of complicated when buying components in general, but the first thing you should also do when you bought a card like this is first clean those cards, and second, apply new thermal paste and new thermal pads, because due to the long heat exposure. The thermal paste will have dried out and the thermal pads may also have, so it's a good idea to change those to keep the card running as cool as possible and not generating any hotspots on the GPU, for example, which might happen with cracked thermal paste, where it covers on most areas very good, but on some it isn't really covering that good, so it creates some hotspots on the GPU, and that also can lead to defects because some parts of the GPU have different components inside it, and if maybe, for example, the memory controller isn't cooled properly and dies, you might have a fully working GPU, but it just won't recognize the VRAM anymore, which obviously you can't tell. But if you would have done some maintenance, that would never have happened. So just do that before installing so that you can be on the safer side and know what you have. Now onto my theories when you don't really know what you are getting. So if you don't know if the card has any warranty left, if you don't know if it's a mining card, if you don't know how long it's been mining, you can still kind of guess how long it's gonna last. As I said, buy a lower consumption card, and I would actually say that a mining card that is not as old is a better bet than one that is older, obviously, because it has not been mined on as much. And also the thing is that if the card is from a reputable brand or a better brand such as Asus, MSI, Gigabyte and stuff, they may have used better components, but also that's kind of nor here nor there because you can't really tell since you cannot really see every component and if it's good or not or whatever. But I would say a mining card is kind of a relatively good case scenario for a graphics card because the graphics cards are running at a constant, though relatively high, temperature, so the temperature variations in the duration of the lifetime of the card isn't as bad as it would, for example, be in a gaming system. And also most mining setups are better cooled. The cards are running at 70, 80, 100% fan speeds. So on a card that has a better cooler on it, the chips are maybe only running at 50 or 60 degrees. So that's also something to keep in mind. So the cards, although running at full load, were kind of running relatively cool. Also, the thing is, if they say, or if the seller tells you that there's a low power BIOS flashed onto it, you can also expect that the card has not been running to its full potential or full power, because the graphics cards are most of the time most efficient at about 80% of their power draw. So that may have been reduced. So the strain on every component on this card is probably lower than with a gaming setup, although the load is at a higher percentage of usage of time on those cards than a gaming setup. So it's probably not that different from a gaming card if the mining setup has been properly maintained and properly tuned. And also with the temperatures I just mentioned, the problem why most high-end cards break or have broken in the past, for example, these 590s here, they had a really big problem where they were running very hot, like 90 degrees on both cores, and due to temperature fluctuations when you stopped gaming and started gaming again, and the core was always getting cold and hot and cold and hot again. This is why the connection of the core itself or the silicon itself and the small green PCB underneath were kind of broken and were always flexing with that temperature, and therefore these cards sometimes just didn't work anymore outright. And this is why when you put them in the oven, for example, and even though the oven wasn't hot enough to reball the GPU, so melt the solder balls that holds the GPU onto the PCB, but it kind of shifted these small connections that the GPU to the other green PCB, so not the PCB of the GPU, but the other green PCB in between. Those shifted and you could use the card again for another 3 to 4 months. So That's why these cards worked again, and this is why these cards died, because of those high temperature fluctuations, which you don't have in mining cards. And this is why I'd say maybe a mining card you may even be better off than buying a gaming card. But as I said, I don't think it doesn't make much of a difference as long as the mining card was tuned for efficiency, for example, because it just wasn't running as hot then. Well, that was a lot of information, but in a conclusion, I would say if you inform yourself about the card you're buying enough so that you know maybe that even if it breaks, you could get an exchange or something, then you obviously can buy a mining card. It wouldn't be a real problem. If you are not confident of buying a mining card, well, it may be better to buy a new card because every used card could be a mining card. Yes, the seller can say it has never been mined on, but do you know for sure? I don't know. So it's kind of always a gamble. I'd rather buy a mining card where the seller is honest. And yeah, that's basically the point you should take away from this. And I hope you learned something from this video. If you did, let me know in the comments. If you have other questions, also do. And I wish you a nice day. Goodbye.